Hello. Simplify Consulting have a white paper all about the future of operations. Now, I'm joined here by Dom House, who's one of our lead consultants. Hello, Dom.
Hello.
Dom's written a chapter on customers and customer focus, so just going to really sort of explore that topic now. So, Dom, tell me a little bit about the research and all the sort of customer focus research around their preferences.
Yeah, sure. So obviously when we were looking at the topic of the future of wealth operations, we wanted to make sure that we incorporated the customer and what the changing dynamics, the changing preferences are for the customers. So what we did is we conducted a survey, so going out to a wide demographic of people to understand how they interact with their financial services provider. We also held a focus group to delve into the topic a little bit further. And we also went to schools and interviewed some young people about how they interact with financial services.
So you went into schools, so that's really interesting, that you're actually talking to the younger generation, because obviously they are our future investors.
Absolutely. So I think for a number of years, wealth providers have had a kind of core group of customers of the older generation, the baby boomers. They've almost grown up together, and the investments of the baby boomers has grown in parallel to the increase in the financial services industry. So yeah, it's really important that we look beyond that when the next generation starts to save for their pensions, when they start opening ISAs. Of course, a lot of them are going to inherit a lot of wealth from that older generation. So what is that going to mean in the future? How should providers adapt their service proposition? How are they going to need to change how they interact with customers? And what is the kind of use case of the technology that they need to build around that? So if you look, for example, at email, where a lot of older people and wealth providers will be using email as default. That's not the case with younger people.
Really?
They're looking for more instant messaging services. They're using apps on their phone. There's quite a big distinction between what we've kind of traditionally viewed as a digital offering and what that needs to look like in the future.
So you obviously talk about tech and AI. It's exploding everywhere. It's part of our lives all the time. So from a wealth industry and operations perspective, it's going to be really transformative, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So technology and artificial intelligence are obviously big topics at the moment, and we absolutely see that becoming more and more integrated into how we, interact with financial services. I think there's a lot of changes that are going to come in. However, I think what we learned from talking to the customers in more detail is that there's still a need for human interaction. So these it's not going to be sweeping replacements of everything with technology. What providers need to do is look at how they integrate that technology, because they're obviously going to be massively useful in terms of how they answer queries, how they share information, how they bring the kind of resources to the people who are talking to customers, and how they kind of help that journey through. But it has to be built into an existing service offering that does have people talking to people. So whilst you would expect a number of kind of simple queries, they're already being replaced in a lot of cases by technology, AI, etc. But that doesn't mean that, more complex queries where it's going to be harder for the technology to answer independently, providers need to understand how they can kind of identify where those complex queries are and how people can come into that process and start interacting with the customer directly.
So give me an example of a complex query.
So I think bereavement comes up time and time again. People aren't going to necessarily want to just do that via an automated messaging service. They actually want to talk to a person who understands what they're going through and have that kind of human interaction that I think people still are going to want. And whilst we'll see technology coming in more and more, it won't ever completely replace that human interaction, particularly for those kind of journeys.
So how will firms do that?
Well, I think you're going to have some level of intervention where the technology needs to kind of be able to escalate to a human. I think the other point that providers are going to have to think about is how they use the data that they're collecting. So when providers are going to have much more information about how customers use the technology, how they interact with applications, how they interact with web pages, and they can use kind of behavioural economics and analysis to better understand how they create a useful journey for the customer.
So you talk about data.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's always the firms, the providers that are collecting data on us and on their customers, and for their gain. So what about on the other side, though, from a customer's perspective? What do they want with their data?
Well, I think what we've found was that customers are far more knowledgeable about the use of data than they maybe were a generation ago or even a few years ago. I think customers have had far more interaction with the use of data on social media, when they do internet shopping or something like that, and they understand how cookies can follow them around, and they start to see the same adverts for things. So I think customers are far more aware of the power of their data and how firms can extract that. So what we found is that customers aren't against data being used, but they want to have some element of control. So they want to have some level of consent to their use of data. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a tick box exercise where you click your preferences and stuff like that, but there needs to be some kind of level of tacit agreement where customers understand that data is being used and how it's going to be used for the firm. I think the other point that customers want is they want to see the benefit of the use of that data. So they don't want the provider to just be taking that data and kind of storing it for their own purposes, as you mentioned. When we talked about the benefits of data with those customers, so whether it's being able to change your address in a single location rather than having to call all of your providers, which is going to be more and more possible with the use of open finance, pension dashboard, those kind of initiatives are going to allow that to be used much more. Or whether it's something like investment firms being able to intervene or discuss with their customer where their kind of risk profile doesn't match their investment choices. Now there's kind of an element of the advice boundary and where that sits, so that's something that the FCA are looking at. But equally, customers understand that those kind of interventions from their provider can actually help them make better and more informed choices. Where they start to draw the line and you start getting a bit more hesitation or rejection of the use of data is where we're talking more around, can your provider look at your spending habits or the details of your bank account? As an example, we were talking about if you started buying baby products, does that mean you could be interested in a junior ISA product? And I think a lot more customers are hesitant about that because of their experience of the use of data. If they haven't shown any interest in a particular product, they don't want kind of being bombarded with adverts or suggestions or things like that. So I think providers are going to have to think very, very carefully about how they use that data. They can absolutely benefit the customer, but it's not a case that the customer doesn't want to give their provider or whoever kind of free reign over their data. They want to be connected to it. They want to have some level of control over how it's being used.
So quite a lot then in the chapter covers obviously the customer preferences and what we need to do with that. Thank you for your insights, Dom.
Thank you.
So to learn more about the topic, like I said, our white paper is coming out soon, and that will explore the customer focus in much more detail and those kind of stats and preferences with those discussions. We also have an event on the 12th of October, Wealth Ops Live at Glaziers Hall in London, and we're going to have lots of experts, industry experts that are going to be talking much further around the topic and the future of ops. Thank you.
Thank you.